Kundalini is simply the unmanifest energy within us, the ultimate power or source of energy within, which ultimately I refer to as the infinite silence. And you see a lot of talk in spiritual circles, shall we say, about Kundalini energy, Kundalini awakening, Kundalini arising, and even workshops dedicated to Kundalini yoga. Now, the Kundalini energy is often represented as a coiled up serpent, and when it arises, it's called often referred to as the serpent arising. Now, this energy, this unmanifest energy, is incredibly powerful. And a Kundalini awakening can actually occur spontaneously. And indeed, I'm aware of quite a lot of cases where this has in fact transpired unexpectedly for people, and particularly in situations where there's quite a lot of an emotional trauma in the energy body. And this actually can be quite a traumatic experience for people, because in many of those cases, there's really no understanding of what's happening. And suddenly this very, very powerful energy, like a nuclear reactor, has gone off inside, showing you dimensions of life that previously you would have been unaware of. And suddenly all this energy is rushing through the body and perceptions are changing. What's called the third eye might be opening to new and higher levels of perception. So these are the kinds of things that happen as the Kundalini arises. And sometimes, as I say, it just happens when perhaps there's been a sudden collapse of identity, and that has allowed a big release of energy to arise. And that can happen in extreme circumstances. But then also outside of that, people can sometimes be focused on, getting the Kundalini to arise, or maybe attending a Kundalini yoga workshop and so forth. And for this, I would advise caution, because the arising of the Kundalini is a very, very powerful energy. It is can be like a nuclear reactor going off inside. And unless you know what you're doing, and I mean really know what you're doing, and are truly anchored within that infinite awareness or the infinite silence, then this is not something really to be messed about with, because it can lead to all sorts of problems and trauma. And it really takes someone who's anchored and deeply present in and as that ultimate awareness to help guide somebody through the transition that's taking place. The thing is, the Kundalini will arise naturally. It doesn't need to be forced, and trying to force it is never a good idea. As you deepen into awareness, and particularly as the emotional body is cleared and the beliefs in that which you are not are dissolved, actually what this is doing is presenting a clearer and clearer channel for that unmanifest energy, ultimately the infinite silence or the infinite awareness, to arise naturally in you. So it's a more effective and indeed safer approach to be open to the dissolution of that which you are not, and allow that, or just simply trust that this unmanifest energy will arise at the perfect moment. Approaching it in other ways can be very dangerous and can lead to lots of misunderstanding. And indeed, in some cases, I've heard of years of trauma from people recovering from this energy arising. So if you're in that position, or you feel that that's arising in you, my pointing would be to seek guidance from a truly realized being. And you might ask, well, how will I know? Well, you will know. There needs to be a resonance with that being that you can trust in, because what they will do is act as an anchor to that which is already present within you. If that's not the case, then this can be very, very challenging. So just to reiterate, Kundalini is simply the unmanifest energy within you, and it doesn't need to be forced. And in fact, that can be quite dangerous. Let it arise naturally. Focus on the dissolution of the emotional body. Life will guide you through your heart to that which needs to emerge next, and the Kundalini will arise naturally. Namaste, namaste, namaste. So, hi everybody, Philip Wade here again. I just felt called to add a part 2 to the Understanding Kundalini video, because the few queries and comments came up with regard to part 1, particularly when I was talking about the fact that one needed to be very careful, and that if not handled in the right way, it could be dangerous and cause unexpected results. So I'm just adding this to sort of address that. I have covered it in part 1, but I wanted to explore it a little bit more deeply. So as I've said, this energy is the unmanifest energy, and when it arises, it can be very, very powerful, and I use the term like a nuclear reactor going off inside. Now, if one has been on a meditative journey, spiritual practice regularly and so forth, the actual arising of the Kundalini very naturally in those types of circumstances is likely to be a relatively, it can even be a non-event. It would just be a natural process that naturally arises as part of a deepening of seeing, perceptions, and the energy held within the body centers. At the other end of the spectrum, and this can happen, as again I referred to in part 1, there's a spontaneous arising of the Kundalini energy. Can often arise after situations of great stress, where there's been an opening or a crack in the ego identification. And then suddenly there's this rush of energy and deeper seeing and so forth. And this can often be a very unexpected set of circumstances. And other ways in which it might arise is if one is doing a practices, and there are quite a lot out there now, focused on the Kundalini energy arising, such as Kundalini yoga and so forth. Now, it's in these latter two circumstances where perhaps it either arises quite spontaneously and unexpectedly, and when a person wasn't looking for it, or it's trying to be forced, where there can be issues that arise. And the reason issues can arise in both of those circumstances is, you see, there is many levels to the human energy. There is an energy body, which we'll call the emotional body, which comes from the conditioning that we all experience in the form, and that's driven by beliefs. And that energy body can carry quite a lot of emotional trauma, and everybody pretty much to some degree or another is carrying some degree of emotional trauma, which may vary from quite small to very significant. Now, when the Kundalini arises in those circumstances, and often either unexpectedly or in what I will call a forced manner, then this is an area where it can lead to problems, because the deeper seeing, the greater perception, the higher levels of perception, the loss of perceptual markers, and so forth, the seeing of things that are not in one's normal sphere of reality, can be a real challenge to people, because suddenly something's occurred that's completely challenged their belief systems, their view of reality. And if you're carrying on top of that a heavy emotional body, then this energy is wanting to act as like a big kind of cleansing from the inside, and it's throwing up all of this energy to be faced and witnessed. And this, at the human level, can be very, very challenging indeed. And whilst one might have quite a profound experience at the initial arising, because of the gravitational pull of that emotional baggage, one can quickly drop back into suffering, and having seen a deeper sense of reality, something that's challenged your belief systems and so forth. Now there's like a tug of war going on between that deeper seeing, that peace, that joy, that even ecstasy that may have been felt during the arising, and then as well, one has been dragged back into the maya of the emotional body that hasn't been fully dissolved by it, having perhaps also seen other aspects of reality, maybe hearing voices inside their head, or seeing visions and so forth. And when you start sharing that in a world, particularly in the West, that is completely, mostly speaking, unaware of this energy, then this can lead to all sorts of challenges. And I've heard stories from people I actually know who've had spontaneous Kundalini arising, have had a heavy emotional body, and have ended up being hospitalized, being put on drugs, being sectioned, and all sorts, all because of the misunderstanding that's prevalent, particularly in the West, of what's actually going on for people. They're being classed as mad, whereas actually what's happening is a natural spiritual process that's cleansing that emotional body from the inside. And this is why I also emphasized in part 1, it is an energy therefore to be treated with care, respect, caution in this regard, because unless you're getting guidance from somebody who's completely and utterly anchored in that infinite silence, that realized space, and knows what's going on and can see what's going on, then if you're going through that experience without that kind of guidance, the types of things I was just referring to in terms of hospitalization, being drugged, being sectioned and so forth, are actually probably more common than we might know of as a result of this natural spiritual process arising. And so it's for these reasons I talked about treating this energy and this process with caution, and not trying to force the process, and instead going about a natural spiritual practice such as meditation and spiritual inquiry. And gradually, over time, the emotional body dissolving, the Kundalini will arise naturally and much more gracefully as a result, and won't be nearly so troublesome as it can be in those circumstances I was talking about. I've heard so many cases where this has happened, where people have been in unaware circumstances and it's either been forced or it's arisen without the support of the knowing, of the deepest realization. And it's taken some people years to get through that situation. And that's not really what the spiritual journey is about. So treat it with reverence. Treat it with caution. Practice your meditation. Practice spiritual inquiry, exploring the question, who am I really? And the Kundalini will then naturally arise in a much more graceful and effortless and beautiful way. Namaste. Namaste. Namaste.